Sometimes life slows down in the most unexpected ways. It can happen in a single moment. One heartbeat, one breath, one sentence. And suddenly, you freeze. I remember the moment she said something that reached a part of me I didn't even know was listening. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was simple, honest, and it hit me like light entering a dark room. And in that instant, I didn't move. I couldn't. Because sometimes love, real love, makes you still. Not out of fear, but out of realization that you're standing in front of a truth you weren't ready to face. A truth about who you are, what you feel, and who you could become. And that's what I want to talk about today. How one moment, one sentence, one person can change the entire way you see yourself. I said something, and I froze. It's strange how a single sentence, a few syllables shaped by breath and emotion, can hold the power to stop your entire world in its tracks. I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't planning for it. It just slipped out, almost like it had been waiting at the edge of my voice for far too long, longing to escape, longing to become real. And when it finally did, when the truth finally made its way from my chest into the open air between us, everything inside me came to a halt. I remember the moment so clearly. The light around us felt softer, like the world understood the weight of what had just left my mouth. My heartbeat stuttered. My breath paused just shy of becoming a full inhale. I could feel the edge of vulnerability brushing against the inside of my ribs. And for a moment, I wasn't sure if I should reach out and hold on to it, or step back from the fragile honesty I had just revealed. It wasn't the kind of thing you planned to say. It wasn't rehearsed, or polished, or safe. It came from a very unguarded part of me, the part that tends to speak only when emotion overwhelms logic, when feeling rises above fear. Maybe that's why I froze, because the hardest truths are the ones that escape unintentionally. They bypass our defenses, bypass our calculations, slip through before fear has the chance to stop them. They reveal us in a way we're never fully prepared for. And once they're spoken, once they exist in the world, they cannot be taken back. I looked at her, and in her eyes I saw a reflection I didn't expect. Understanding, maybe. Surprise, definitely. A kind of gentle pause, like she too felt the shift in the air. Like she recognized that this wasn't something casual or careless. It was real. It mattered. And that realization was enough to send my entire inner world spiraling into stillness. Have you ever felt that? The moment when you've spoken from a place so honest it scares you. When you realize the words you've let slip are bigger than you intended, more vulnerable than you're used to, more revealing than you thought you were ready to be. It's a kind of quiet shock, gentle but powerful. A shock that wraps around your spine and whispers, "This is it. This is you. This is the truth you've been carrying." What I said wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple. But simple things can be the heaviest sometimes. Simple things can carry the entire weight of your heart when spoken in the right moment, to the right person, with the right amount of sincerity. And in that moment, it felt as though the universe had paused, listening carefully, waiting to see what would come next. But nothing came next, not immediately, because I froze, not because I regretted what I said, but because I suddenly felt the enormity of it, the bravery of it, the risk of it. It's one thing to feel something deeply, it's another to admit it out loud. Words transform feelings. They give shape to emotions that have been quietly pulsing beneath the surface. They turn silent hopes into spoken realities. And once they're spoken, everything changes. I felt exposed, but not in a painful way. More like standing in sunlight after spending a long time in the shade. It was warm, soft, illuminating, but unfamiliar enough to make me want to close my eyes for a moment before adjusting. Because speaking from the heart isn't something we always train ourselves to do. In fact, most of us spend years learning to hide the very things that matter most, believing vulnerability is a weakness rather than the intense form of courage it truly is. When I froze, it wasn't fear that held me still, it was awe. The kind of awe that arrives when you realize you've stepped into a moment that will stay with you, one that leaves a mark on your internal landscape. I didn't know how she would respond. I didn't know if she would step closer or step away. I didn't know if the truth I'd spoken would make her heart open or her walls rise. But I knew the moment was honest. And sometimes that's all a moment needs to be. Honesty has a way of reshaping the space between two people. It can sharpen it, soften it, expand it, or collapse it. It all depends on what follows. And as I stood there, suspended between the breath I had taken and the next one I hoped would come, I could feel the balance of everything we were, everything we could be, leaning into a possibility that neither of us had dared to name before. What I said wasn't planned, but it was true. And truth, when spoken with love, carries a kind of quiet power. that nothing else can replicate. It's not aggressive, not demanding, not forceful. It's gentle, it's warm, it's sincere. It says, I'm giving you a piece of my heart. Do with it what you will, but know that it's real. And when you offer truth like that, it's impossible to remain unchanged. I froze because I knew that. I froze because I understood the significance of that moment even before I understood the consequences. I froze because sometimes the heart speaks before the mind is ready to handle the conversation. And when love reveals itself, not the dramatic, cinematic kind, but the quiet kind that slips in through small moments, it can take your breath away. I could feel everything inside me shifting, old fears loosening their grip, old doubts losing their voice. There was a kind of softness filling the space between us, like the air had turned into something almost tangible, a gentle warmth holding us in place. And in that warmth, in that stillness, I realized something important, that freezing isn't always a sign of fear. Sometimes freezing is what happens when you finally encounter something real enough, deep enough, meaningful enough to make the entire world pause around you. I didn't need her to respond right away. I didn't need to fill the silence with explanations or disclaimers or apologies. The moment was already full, full of truth, full of feeling, full of unspoken possibility. Some silences don't need to be broken, they just need to be felt. And the silence between us that day was one of those silences. It held both the vulnerability of what I said and the hope of what it might mean. It held the trembling edges of my confession and the gentle steadiness of her presence. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply stood there with my heart open, waiting, not for validation, not for reassurance, but for connection. And when she finally breathed in, when she finally shifted just slightly, I felt something in me unfreeze. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to soften the tightness in my chest, enough to bring breath back into my lungs, enough to remind me that vulnerability, even when it terrifies you, is always worth the risk. The moment became a kind of quiet memory, one that still lives in the gentle spaces of my mind. A memory of courage and softness intertwining. A memory of truth spoken without a script. A memory of what it feels like to be fully human. Imperfect, hopeful, scared, brave, tender, exposed, and alive all at once. When I look back at it now, I realize something beautiful. Freezing doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes freezing means you finally cared enough for everything inside you to stand still while your heart caught up to what your soul already knew. Sometimes freezing is your body's way of saying, this matters. Don't rush it. Feel it. Sometimes freezing is the quiet doorway into a deeper connection, one built on truth rather than performance. On feeling rather than fear. I said something and I froze, and in that frozen moment I discovered a part of myself I hadn't known how to reveal before. A softer part, a braver part, a part that loved without knowing how to disguise it. And maybe that's what love does. It reveals us. It strips away the layers we've built to hide our tenderness. It breaks down the walls we thought we needed and shows us that connection thrives not in perfection, but in honesty. I froze because the moment deserved stillness, because the truth deserved space, because my heart deserved a chance to breathe in the possibility of someone truly hearing it. And in that stillness, in that breathless pause, something quietly beautiful began to unfold between us. I said something and I froze, and ever since that moment, I've been thinking about why the heart chooses certain moments to reveal itself without warning. There's something almost poetic about how truth slips out when you least expect it. You carry emotions quietly, like folded letters inside your chest, and then suddenly, in the middle of an unplanned breath, the words find their way out. They move through you with a softness that feels both terrifying and beautiful. And before you even realize what you've done, the truth has already taken shape in the air. That's what happened to me. I said something honest, something real, something that didn't ask for permission from fear or hesitation. And as soon as it escaped, I felt everything inside me come to a standstill. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't surrounded by grand gestures or loud revelations. It was simple, almost too simple. But sometimes the simplest words are the ones weighted with the most emotion. Sometimes the quietest confessions echo the loudest within you. I felt that echo spreading through my chest, soft but powerful, gentle but undeniable. And when I looked at her, standing there with a kind of stillness that felt almost sacred, I realized just how vulnerable those words had made me. Vulnerability has a way of pulling you into an unfamiliar kind of silence, one where every heartbeat becomes louder, one where every breath feels like it carries the weight of 1,000 unspoken feelings. I froze because the truth I had spoken wasn't just a truth about her, it was a truth about myself. It was a truth I hadn't said out loud before, even when I'd felt it quietly pressing against my ribs for weeks, maybe months. It's strange how we can live with a feeling for so long, let it sleep inside us, feed it pieces of our attention, and still be surprised when it suddenly spills out. The heart doesn't always wait for permission. Sometimes it just speaks. And when I heard myself say it, when I realized the honesty I had allowed to slip through my voice, every part of me paused, as if trying to understand what had just happened. There's a moment that follows a confession where everything goes silent, not because there's nothing left to say, but because the emotion is too big to share space with noise. That's where I found myself, suspended between what I had said and what would come next. I stood there with my heart open, exposed in a way I wasn't accustomed to, feeling the weight of uncertainty settle around me like a gentle cloud. I didn't know what she would say. I didn't know what she would feel. I didn't know if what I had spoken would align with the rhythm of her own heart, or if it would drift past her like a soft breeze. But she didn't pull away. She didn't frown, or turn, or flinch. She just looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw a kind of softness that made the air around us feel warmer. It wasn't confirmation, it wasn't rejection. It was presence, pure presence, the kind that says, without a single word, I'm here, I'm listening, I'm not running. And sometimes that's all you need in a moment like that. Not answers, not clarity, but presence. Presence has a way of holding you together when your emotions feel too large to carry alone. Presence has a way of calming the shaking inside your chest, reminding you that you're not standing in that moment by yourself. Still, I froze, because truth is powerful. Because what I said carried pieces of my heart I wasn't used to sharing. Because speaking from love feels different from speaking from logic. Love asks you to step beyond the edges of your comfort, to move into a space where control doesn't exist in the same way. It asks you to trust, not because you know the outcome, but because the feeling itself is worth the risk. And in that moment, I understood just how much courage it takes to be honest. In matters of the heart, there's a delicate tension that forms in the air after you confess something meaningful. It feels like time stretches, like the universe holds its breath, waiting to see what the next heartbeat will bring. That's what it felt like. Every second felt longer than the last. Every micro movement felt amplified. Every sensation inside me felt sharper. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I could feel warmth rising in my throat. I could feel an invisible trembling weaving through my thoughts. But I didn't regret it, not for one moment. Because even though I froze, even though uncertainty wrapped around me like a thin veil, I knew that what I had spoken was real. Realness has a kind of quiet bravery to it. It doesn't need to shout or demand attention. It simply exists with a purity that resonates beyond fear. Realness doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't wait for your approval. It emerges when your heart finally decides that silence is no longer enough. And that's what happened. My heart simply chose to speak. It chose to reveal itself in a moment that didn't feel grand or orchestrated. It chose vulnerability over comfort. It chose connection over safety. And once those words were out, I knew they couldn't be taken back. But I also knew they didn't need to be. I think that's why I froze, because I recognized the depth of what I had just allowed myself to say. I recognized the gravity of letting someone see that part of me. I recognized that love, true love, isn't loud or chaotic or overwhelming. It's gentle, it's warm, it's honest. It's a soft truth placed quietly in someone else's hands with the hope that they handle it with care. Love reveals itself in tiny moments, moments that feel like they could slip between the cracks of everyday life if you're not paying attention. Yet somehow, despite their size, those moments become the ones you remember the most. What I said that day came from a place inside me I didn't visit often, a place where fear and hope coexist, where longing blends with silence, where unsaid feelings sit patiently behind every heartbeat, waiting for the right moment to be acknowledged. When the words finally came out, it felt like opening a door that had been closed for too long. And the breathlessness I felt afterward wasn't because I wished I could take them back. It was because I finally understood the weight of carrying something so meaningful for so long. She stood there, still listening, still present, still open. And seeing her openness made my stillness feel less like paralysis and more like reverence. Reverence for the moment, reverence for the honesty between us, reverence for the possibility that had just been born from a few simple words. I didn't need to run. I did. Need to explain. I didn't need to fill the silence with nervous rambling. The moment was full enough on its own. Sometimes silence doesn't need to be broken. Sometimes silence is the language the heart uses when words would only complicate what is already clear. I could feel myself breathing again, slowly, gently, not because I was certain of what would happen next, but because something inside me understood that freezing isn't always a sign of weakness. Sometimes freezing is a sign that you've reached a point of authenticity so pure that the heart needs time to absorb it. Sometimes freezing is what happens when you finally allow yourself to be seen. Sometimes freezing is a quiet acknowledgement that the truth you spoke carries the potential to change you in ways you're not fully prepared for yet. I said something, and I froze. But in that frozen moment, I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Alive with fear, yes, but also alive with hope. Alive with uncertainty, but also alive with possibility. Alive with the understanding that love requires not just feeling, but expression. That it's not enough to care silently, that sometimes the heart needs to speak so it can free itself from the confines of unspoken longing. Every time I reflect on that moment, I understand it more deeply. I understand that the act of expressing love is an act of courage. I understand that revealing your heart is not about expecting a specific outcome, but about honoring the truth within you. I understand that freezing is not a failure to act. It is part of the action. It is the pause that holds the weight of what you've just revealed. It is the stillness that allows you to feel the full gravity of your own honesty. If I had chosen silence instead, if I had held back, if I had allowed fear to keep those words buried, I would still be carrying that untouched truth inside me. I would still be waiting for a perfect moment that may never come. I would still be protecting myself from vulnerability instead of stepping into the beauty that vulnerability creates. But I spoke, and even though the words surprised me, even though they left me frozen, I wouldn't change that moment for anything. Music, because it reminded me of something essential, that love, in all its gentle forms, asks us to show up fully, even when our voice trembles. Looking back, I realized that freezing didn't diminish the power of the moment. If anything, it amplified it. It made the honesty feel real. It made the emotion feel deeper. It made the connection feel more human. Freezing gave me a chance to absorb what I had said, to honor its significance, to appreciate the courage it took for those words to leave my heart. It also gave her a moment to feel the sincerity behind them. Sometimes the heart speaks best in the quiet, and sometimes stillness carries more meaning than speech ever could. That moment stays with me because of how deeply it felt like surrender. No a surrender of identity or strength, but a surrender to truth, a surrender to love, a surrender to the recognition that some feelings deserve to be spoken, even when the voice that carries them shakes. And that moment, with its fragile honesty and trembling courage, is one I carry with gratitude, because it showed me that the most meaningful moments often arise from the simplest truths. And the truth I spoke that day, the one that froze me in place, was a truth my heart had been trying to share long before I found the courage to say it aloud.